Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents, the Australia Institute podcast where we talk about just what the hell is going on in the economy. I'm Eleanor Johnston-Leake, the senior content producer here at the Australia Institute, and joining me again today while Greg Jericho is away is our senior economist, Matt Grudnoff. Hello, Matt.
G'day, Eleanor.
So the ABC's put out some new analysis this week. It's showing the after-tax incomes needed to afford a median-priced house in each capital city. Yep. Did you have a look at the numbers?
Yeah, they were big. So they kind of ranged from you would need to earn about $240,000 in Sydney down to, if you're in Darwin, it was only $103,000. But you need to remember, these are after-tax income. So if you think, I'm on $103,000, I could afford a house in Darwin. No, that's after you've paid tax. You need $103,000 left over.
That's pretty shocking, really.
Yeah. The housing market, over the last 20 years has just gone mad.
Yeah. And here in Canberra, it's $177,000.
Yep. That's a lot of income.
Not the income that I make currently. So
no, neither me.
No, not looking good. So, Matt, how did we get here? How did the housing market get this bad?
Well, let's just say to begin with, it wasn't easy. Australia has put a lot of time and a lot of effort into screwing the housing market up.
Yes. We really went for it.
25 years of time to screw this housing market up. And it has cost billions and billions of dollars in capital gains tax discount and negative gearing in order to screw it up.
The International Monetary Fund has downgraded its forecast for economic growth around the world next year to just over 4%. And tucked into its report is a warning to Australia about expensive property prices.
Ultimately, they invest in something. Now, to hit that on the head with new taxes is crazy and defies common sense.
The main issue about negative gearing is this. If you abolish negative gearing on investment properties, there's a strong argument that rents would increase.
It is really a tax minimisation scheme disguised as a housing policy.
The federal government says there'll be no changes to capital gains or negative gearing policies.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers is being encouraged by the International Monetary Fund to wind back capital gains tax break.
They say that this tax exemption disproportionately benefits the wealthy and it should be made to be less generous.
We're not contemplating or considering resurrecting the policies that we took to the 2019 election.
So we spent a lot of money on making things a lot worse.
Exactly right. It has been a real effort, and I think we should applaud Australia for managing to achieve this. That's right, yeah. So basically, the thing that set the market off was the capital gains tax discount, tied up with negative gearing. Then along the way, we've had programs that have tried in inverted commas, to make housing more affordable, which has actually made housing less affordable. Things like first home buyers grants, for example, which basically just pushed up the price of housing. And finally, we've had the situation where the government has largely abandoned building public housing. It's certainly, compared to the 70s and 80s, we build nowhere near enough public housing today. And just over time, that decrease in the supply of public housing has also added to the problem.
So a lot of factors working together to make things a lot worse.
Exactly right.
Could you just quickly explain what capital gains tax discount and negative gearing is?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the capital gains tax discount, if you earn income as a wage, if you earn income because you've got a business and you earn a profit, if you own shares, whatever it is, you pay your marginal rate of tax. There is one form of income, only one, where you pay less than that, and that is capital gain. So if you buy an asset and sell it for more than you bought it for, you've made a capital gain. And what the tax office does is it says that, let's say you bought a house and you sold it for an extra $200,000. The tax office will say, well, let's pretend that you only made $100,000 capital gain rather than $200,000. And the other $100,000 is tax-free.
It's a pretty good deal.
It is an excellent deal. And so basically what it's meant is that people have seen that, well, making money from capital gains, i.e. investing in housing and then selling it later for more, is a great way to earn income that is very tax effective.
And what about negative gearing?
So negative gearing is just the idea where the costs of you renting out a house as the owner of the house are more than the cost that the amount of rent you get, then that difference is a loss. And the taxman will basically pay for some of that loss. So you'll be able to write that loss off on your tax. And so where this is important is the biggest single expense in this is the interest payments on any mortgage you have on that rental property. So as house prices have gone up, mortgages for those houses have gone up, and the interest payments have also gone up. So what's happened is more and more people have become negatively geared.
So Matt, the solution to this housing crisis seems to be focusing on increasing house supply and fighting NIMBYism. First of all, can you describe NIMBYism to us?
Yeah, so the idea of NIMBYs is it stands for not in my backyard. It's basically people who go, yes, I want new housing development, but not near me. Somewhere in some other suburb is where I want that housing development. So they resist in their own area and are happy to see it somewhere else.
I want good things to happen, but not if they affect me at any stage in any way.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
The key to the solution for housing in this country is housing supply. And that is why our measures have been comprehensive and across the board.
What we're talking about here is working with the construction sector. We've obviously had a lot of conversations with the sector about what is achievable, but also what's ambitious, because we need to be ambitious in terms of turning around the housing challenges in Australia.
And so how do we fight this? Like, what's the solution here?
Yeah, so there has been a lot of focus on housing supply as the only solution, right? So you see a lot of people saying, well, the way we make housing more affordable is we add a whole lot more housing to the market. And that is true to a certain extent, but it's not the complete picture. Just adding supply is not going to make housing more affordable. How do we know this? Well, over the last 10 years, the population has increased by 15%. So if we were to just keep housing at the same level, the number of dwellings would have to grow by at least 15%.
Yeah.
But they haven't grown by 15%, they've grown by 19%.
Oh.
So we've actually seen supply grow faster than population. At the same time, over those 10 years, house prices have increased by about 80%. Therefore, we know from that housing supply is not the only part of the solution. There is obviously something else going on. And that other thing is speculation in housing because of those tax concessions that's driving lots of investors into the market to speculate on housing and push up the price of housing.
So why has housing become this market that speculators decided to get into? Why has it become this big source of investment?
Well, the main reason is it keeps going up in price.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're speculating in a market, what you actually want is you want the asset to go up in value. And house prices in Australia have been increasing over the last 20 years twice as fast as income. And so every year they keep going up. And so if you've bought a house and then you want to sell it a bit down the road, every year you're making more money. And those tax concessions, the capital gains tax discount in particular, is making that a super tax effective way to earn money because you're only paying half the tax that you would otherwise pay on that capital gain.
And it's probably a bit easier to get into than buying stocks and shares and playing the market that way, I guess.
Yeah, it is if you've got money.
Yeah.
So, for people who are locked out of the market, weirdly in Australia, it is easier to buy your second and third and fourth house than it is to buy your first.
Yeah.
Because the hardest house to get is that first one. And that's the one that people are increasingly being locked out of. And also because you don't get negative gearing, for example, on the house you live in, you only get it on investment properties. So we've got these tax concessions that help investors that don't help people who are getting into their first house.
So you say that these tax concessions benefit people who are buying investment properties. So what kind of people are we talking about? Are we talking about the mega rich?
Well, certainly those at the top. We know that the negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount, that's worth about $20 billion a year. So it's not a small amount. And that about 70% of that $20 billion go to the top 10%.
70% for the top 10%.
And so the bottom half get only 8% of that. So it's massively skewed to the top end. We also know that rental properties are really concentrated in a small group. So we know from the tax stats, for example, that a quarter of investment properties, so 1 in 4 investment properties, are owned by just 1% of taxpayers.
1 in 4 properties are owned by 1% of taxpayers.
Exactly right.
That's a pretty scary figure.
Yeah, so these are people who own multiple properties. They don't own one, they own lots of properties.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing in Australia is housing is becoming increasingly concentrated into a smaller and smaller group, and which means obviously that there's a larger and larger group that are just missing out entirely.
I mean, it seems obvious that we need to get rid of these tax concessions, but there's an argument that getting rid of them will just decrease the number of properties available and push up prices for renters. Is there any merit to this argument?
Yeah, so if we decide that we want to get rid of these tax concessions to make housing affordable, the biggest argument is, well, if you're not providing incentives for people to buy houses and rent them out, then there'll be less rental properties and rents will go up. But that's not actually true, because the houses, let's say that we do get rid of these tax concessions, and let's say that people decide that they don't want to invest in property anymore. Those houses don't vanish. So when a property speculator decides, well, I don't want to rent the house anymore, they don't burn it to the ground and it sort of leaves the market. They sell it. And who are they selling it to? Well, if investors aren't buying, it's owner-occupiers that are buying.
First-home buyers, people who are actually living in
People who are currently
Yeah.
renting right now who want to buy are going to go out and buy them. So sure, the amount of rental properties might go down by, say, 10%, but the amount of renters will also go down by 10% because those 10% are going from renting to buying their own home. They're buying those houses that investors no longer want. So it won't actually affect the rental market at all.
So the housing market being as cooked as it is right now, with house prices being so high, what does that mean for renters? Does that mean that rents are going to be higher for people?
Yeah, so as house prices go up, then obviously the people investing in them demand higher rents. So if you're suddenly paying, instead of paying $400,000 for a house, you're paying $800,000 for a house as an investor, then you're going to want more rent from renters. The link is not as tight as that, but over time it does. And so what we saw during the pandemic when interest rates came down was house prices shot up, but rents didn't immediately shoot up. But now we shift over a couple of years and we're seeing rents rapidly increase. So there is a link. It doesn't always happen immediately, but it does happen over time. So as house prices get higher and higher, that will ultimately drag rents higher and higher and make it harder for renters as well.
And another argument that is often used to argue for keeping these tax concessions is that they encourage the building of new properties. So there's increasing supply of housing to the market. More people have homes. Isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, it would be if it was true, but it's not. The reality is that around 90% of houses that are negatively geared were bought on the secondhand market. So all that it was really doing was pushing up the existing stock of housing. It wasn't bringing new housing onto the market. But let's be clear, if we really do believe that negative gearing in particular is this great tool for bringing on new supply of housing, and to be clear, there's no evidence of that happening, but if we did, we could simply do what the Labor Party was proposing in 2016 and 2019 and just restrict negative gearing only to new houses. If we like negative gearing because it brings new housing on, then we have no reason to do it on a secondhand property. We should only allow houses that are bought brand new to be negatively geared, and that might encourage more housing to come onto the market. But the reality is that's not how it's being used, and in the future, I don't think that's how it will be used. But if that's what we want to do, we can change the rules so that that's how we do it.
Australia's housing crisis has never been more dire, nor more widespread.
Our homeless numbers are up 23% in a year.
I have never seen homelessness and the demand on our services as great as it is at the moment.
We're about to go into winter, and what we see are clients who are not going to be turning their heating on because they know they won't be able to pay the bill.
Cost of living has really impacted on that, and also the increases in rent.
It's spread across income groups and it's moved from the city into the regions.
Uniting WA says it's seen employed families who have been forced to live in tents or their cars.
So when we talk about, people speculating on investing in the market, it's not really the same as, speculating on investing in stocks or, starting a small business on Etsy or something like that. It's investing in something that is actually important and vital to people.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Previously, we have thought that housing was something that you raised a family in, that it was a shelter, what in economics we call a use good. But over the last 25 years, we've turned it into an investment good, a way you can grow your nest egg in retirement. And I think we need to get back to that idea that housing is a place of shelter and security rather than a place where other people can make money. If people all decide to rush in and invest in the stock market, then the stock market becomes overvalued and, that might burn eventually some people who are investing. But if everybody rushes in and overinvests in the property market and that pushes property prices up, then people struggle financially. People struggle to put a roof over their head. People struggle to, find money for feeding their family and paying their bills. There is a real moral consequence to overinvestment in housing because housing is a human right. Housing is a necessary good. If you really are thinking, well, I've got this extra money and I want to invest, I would suggest that housing is not the place to invest. There are lots of ways you can invest and make money. Housing is something that people need, and we shouldn't be trying to push up the price of housing.
We've talked a bit about, negatively gearing new houses and fighting NIMBYism. What other solutions are there to this crisis?
Yeah, look, so actually the solution is pretty easy, and it actually fits like a hand in a glove in the sense that there are two big solutions. First, get rid of those tax concessions. All right, that will take the speculators out of the market. That will mean that house prices don't continue to rise so much every year. That will make housing more affordable all by itself. It will bring house prices down compared to people's income. But the other solution is the government needs to build more public housing. But the point is that getting rid of those tax concessions will raise tens of billions of dollars. Now, that money can then be used to, guess what?
Build more public housing?
Exactly right. So the two solutions fit really well together. We want to build more houses. If the government builds lots more public housing, that brings new stock onto the market. That means that there are more houses that can be cheaply rented, which brings rents down, but also it just brings more stock onto the market and brings house prices down. But that can be paid for by getting the speculators out of the market, by getting rid of the capital gains tax discount and reforming negative gearing. So it's a great solution that fits really well together.
Killing two birds with one stone, really.
Exactly right, yeah.
And in terms of building public housing, this is something that the government used to do a lot more of and still does for some people.
Yeah, exactly right. So we have a thing called Defence Housing Australia. So as part of the Defence Force's compensation package, they're given cheap housing. And so the government effectively builds housing for the Defence Force. Well, we could expand that and we could have Nurse Housing Australia or Teacher Housing Australia or even just People Housing Australia. And we could just build housing for people. What's really weird in Australia is that everybody thinks that housing is a good investment. We're all told, save up a deposit, go into debt and buy a house.
Get on the property ladder.
Yep, that will set you up. That's a great investment. And, people are out there, as we've said, buying a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 50th house.
Oh, God.
Wouldn't
that be nice?
As an investment. There's one group in Australian society who don't think housing is a good investment, and that's weirdly the government. If the government built a whole new heap of housing, what are they doing? Well, they're investing in housing and they would have that asset and they would be able to rent it out. The same people who think that housing is a great investment for everybody else, for some weird reason, don't think that the government should invest in this asset. And the more that the government builds and the more they invest in this, the cheaper housing will become for everybody.
So over the decades, we've gone through different governments, Labor and Liberal. We recently had 9 years of coalition government. We've just had about 2 years of Labor government. Why is this so hard? If the solutions are so obvious, why isn't government doing them?
Yeah, I think it's largely because there is a very small group. We talked about a quarter of rental properties being owned by just 1% of taxpayers. There is a small group who benefit enormously from these tax concessions. The vast majority of people don't. Right? But there is this small group and they get very upset when you talk about getting rid of these tax concessions. And they make a lot of noise and politicians are very sensitive to that. But I think the politics on this has massively shifted. I think the very fact that so many people are now locked out of the housing market that they are becoming such a large group, and they're increasingly upset that they are, previous generations have been able to get into the housing market and they are not, that the politics is actually turning on this. We saw in 2016 and 2019 under Shorten, the Labor government took some very good policies to the electorate in the form of the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing.
Were they saying they were going to get rid of it, or?
Yeah, they were proposing to halve the capital gains tax discount and to make negative gearing so it was only for new properties.
Good policies.
Yeah, good policies that they would actually work. Now, they were defeated in both those elections. I would argue not because of these housing policies. Certainly, they took them to the 2016 election, and nobody after that thought that, these were terrible policies and they were awful. They did lose the election in 2019 unexpectedly. I think that was more because they had a whole suite of different policies that people couldn't get across. And then after that, Labor basically threw the baby out with the bathwater and just got rid of all of those policies. I think that there's a real political gains to be made in being the party that represents people who can't get into the housing market, who want to get in there, those people who want housing to be more affordable. And that group is only going to get larger. $20 billion every year is being pumped into the market, making housing less affordable, blowing the housing market up. Eventually, this group is going to be the majority. And increasingly also, there are people who own their own home who don't benefit from higher housing. People might think, well, if my house price goes up, then that's good. But if you ever sell that house for the inflated price, you've then got to move somewhere else and buy another house, and that's at an inflated price. So the only people who benefit from higher house prices are people who invest, who have more than one property.
The 1% or 10% or whatever it is.
Exactly right. This small group that are the beneficiaries. And so I think that the politics is going to shift on this. I think that parties are going to eventually see that they can't just put up nonsense policies like first home buyers grants and help to buy schemes and all these kind of other schemes that either do nothing or make housing less affordable. I think that we're going to see a lot of pressure on our politicians to make housing more affordable.
Has anyone actually proposed any good changes at the moment, or are we just sort of hoping they will soon?
Look, I mean, the Greens, for example, have some great policies around the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing and on trying to control the increase in rental prices. But in the main parties, the main two political parties, there hasn't been a lot of movement yet. But again, they're constantly asked about this. Whenever housing affordability comes up as an issue, and to be clear, this is the issue I get asked the most about. When I'm out there doing radio interviews or TV interviews, the one issue that I get asked about more than anything else is housing affordability. And, the main parties are being asked about this too. So I think that Labor is coming under pressure on this issue, and it would be great to see them actually take the lead and actually do something really positive for housing affordability.
And we'll be coming into an election pretty soon. So
we will be.
That'll be interesting to see how it shakes out.
Take note, Labor.
Yeah.
This is a vote-winning idea.
All right, well, Matt, I think that's probably all we've got time for today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me again.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show today. You can reach out to us via email at podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au, or you can find us on Twitter at the Oz Institute, and that's with an AUS. Matt is at Matt Grudnoff, and I'm at EleanorJ_L. Our theme music is from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Eleanor Johnston-Leake, and I'll see you next week.